How Beaver Stole Fire. This is from the Nez Perce. In the time before there were any people in the world, animals and birds and plants walked and talked together just like people do now. And in that time, the only ones with the secret of fire were the pine trees. They guarded this secret very jealously, and they would not give it to any living creature, even if those creatures were in danger of freezing. One winter it was so very cold that all the animals were afraid that they might freeze to death. Only the pine trees were warm because they had fire. The animals held a council to see how they might go about stealing some of the pine trees' fire. They came up with plan after plan, but none of them succeeded. Finally, Beaver made an attempt. Beaver knew that the pine trees were about to hold a great council near the banks of the Grand Round River in Idaho. He knew it was so cold that the trees would light a fire to warm themselves. And so Beaver hid himself in a place where he could watch the pine trees prepare for their council. First, the trees went into the river to bathe, and the water was very cold. Then the trees came out of the river, and they built a fire to warm themselves from the cold water. But even as they shivered while they warmed themselves, the trees were still very crafty. They posted guards to watch for any animal or bird that might try to steal their fire. However, Beaver knew they would post guards, so he had hid himself in a very good place before the guards were put there, and after the fire had been lit. As Beaver expected, soon a live coal came rolling down from the trees. Beaver jumped out of his hiding place, grabbed the coal, and ran away as fast as he could. The trees saw Beaver running away with a piece of their fire, and they went after him in hot pursuit. Whenever the trees got too close, Beaver would dodge this way and that, and this is why the Grand Ronde River has places where it is straight and places where it is crooked and winding. After a very long chase, many of the trees got too tired to continue, so they planted themselves on the banks of the river right where they were, making a forest so thick that even the best hunters had difficulty moving through it. A few of the trees kept running after Beaver, but eventually they too got tired and they planted themselves where they stopped. And this is why some places along the river have a dense forest, while in other places there's only a few scattered trees. One cedar tree stubbornly refused to give up the chase and kept running after Beaver after nearly all the other trees had stopped. A handful of other trees came with the cedar. Finally, the cedar realized that he could not catch Beaver. He looked about and he saw a high hill. "I will climb that hill," said the cedar to the other trees, "and that way maybe we can see where Beaver goes, even if we cannot catch him." The other trees agreed that this was a good plan. So the cedar climbed up to the top of the hill and planted himself there on the crown. He looked down and he saw Beaver diving into Big Snake River at the place where the Grand Ronde empties into it. As the cedar watched, Beaver swam across the Big Snake. Then Beaver went to the willows that stood on the banks of the river and gave them some of the pine trees' fire. After that, Beaver ran along the banks of the river for a while, then dove back in And then he gave fire to the birches on the other side of the river. And this is why, when people make fire, they use willow and birchwood, because they are the trees that have the fire that Beaver stole. And fire will come out of their wood when it is rubbed in a certain way. And the cedar tree who climbed the hill, he stands there still, all alone, looking out over the river and the trees that got pieces of the pine tree's fire. And when people go by that place, they tell this story, and they point out the lone cedar who chased Beaver all the way to that very spot. The end.